Hey everyone, welcome back to Brian's Mysteries and Adventures on Trail. I hope everyone's doing well. This is going to be the first video in a three-part series where I'm going to be covering very bizarre disappearances of hunters, that very bizarre circumstances surrounded them. They all happened in different parts of the world, and they were all very experienced for the most part. So in this case, we are going up to Quebec, Canada. It's up to the northern tundra of Quebec, if you will, and it's kind of hard to see, but so I put this map up, so that blue area and then where the X is where this took place. And this gentleman by the name of James P. Rambone Jr., who was 51 years old at the time. He was an American. He was living in Rhode Island. He was trained as a carpenter, but he was also a farmer. And at the time, he had a farm with various crops. He had chickens. He had pigs. He had a girlfriend. Her name is Pam Russo, who they were very much in love. They both had the same type of interests, and they just had a great relationship. And according to her, he was looking forward to what he called this trip of a lifetime to go up and do some hunting in Quebec. And according to her and her family, he had been hunting since he was a young child. So he was very experienced. He started when he was 8 or 9 years old, and he was 51 at the time, and he had hunted all over. And he was a very well-respected man. The only thing I could find that he ever did was one court record of a speeding ticket back in 1976, which he got a $35 ticket for. And that was it. I mean, this guy was very smart. He was very trained. He was, suited for the mountains. And the one thing, though, with this trip, even the natives in this area, as you can see, these pictures are all from the area, the northern tundra, even the natives said that most people that come that aren't native to the area, they hire a guide to show them where the caribou are. Now, caribou, I found out, are a type of reindeer, and at the time the population was over 800,000 in that particular area. So they had certain hunting times set up, and this was in September of 2003 that he went up for this caribou hunting trip. And they were in this place called Camp Sardine, which was literally almost 250 miles from the nearest village. But he was so confident, and he was very well aware of his abilities. He didn't think anything of it. And there was couple other people with him. But on this particular day, for some reason, he just decided to go off on his own through the rugged tundra. He apparently saw some caribou across this river called Caniapiscau River, which is south of Quebec, Quebec. I know there's a lot of tough names and things that are either French or native, so I did my best, and I believe I pronounced that correctly. And he went off, unfortunately, by himself, and shortly after he went off, the other hunters that were at the camp heard 2 gunshots. So they assumed that he had found a caribou, and that later he would return, and then they would go retrieve the animal together and then take it back and do whatever they do to get the meat. And however, unfortunately, by 3 p.m. he still hadn't returned, and this was hours later. So the other hunters sounded the alarm, and this is when the official search for him got started. It's important to note that in this case, Mr. Rambone was an epileptic. However, according to his girlfriend, Pam, and his family, he had not had a seizure in over 2 years. But they also said that due to the excitement of the trip and other factors, these can all be indicators or triggers for people having a seizure. And they said that when he would have a seizure, it would be 15 to 20 minutes after he came out of it to really realize even where he was. And they were worried that he probably, if this had happened, he became disoriented and he could have walked off in any unknown direction. So there definitely was a worry due to that. Pam and Mr. Rambone's family was hopeful, though, because in July of that year, of 2003, he had seen his doctor and he had been given a clean bill of health. So they were hopeful that they would find him. Now, here's where things started getting bizarre. Other hunters that were in Mr. Rambone's party later on that day found his fluorescent orange hunting vest and his camera near the remains of a caribou carcass. However, that was all they found. There was no gun, his rifle wasn't there, there was no other clothing, no footprints, no other sign that he had ever been there. So this started several air and ground searches that included obviously tracking dogs and various local law enforcement, which is called La Sûreté de Quebec. But you have to remember that they were almost 250 miles away from any civilization, so it took a while for these state and any local officials of search and rescue to get there. However, La Sûreté de Quebec, which is basically the equivalent of their state police, I guess would be the closest thing that we would have, they noticed a big problem, and that was that since he had taken off his orange vest, all he had on was camouflage gear, which said that it would be very difficult to spot from the air. So I'm going to put up some pictures of what it looks like. These pictures were taken from 5 to 10 feet away of people with similar camouflage. It is unbelievable how hard it is to see them. So I can't imagine if that's all he was wearing, trying to see this person from the air. So they knew that this was going to be a very challenging search because according to the other members of his hunting group, he was not wearing an orange hunting hat. Everything else he had was camouflage gear. This search went on for over a week, and according to all the authorities, they did a highly intensive search even though the weather was getting bad, and they found no evidence to suggest that James, or he went by Jim by most of the people that knew him, they said there was no evidence that he succumbed to the elements or predators, either animal or humans, or even an accident. It was like he just disappeared from the face of the earth, they quoted in saying. However, his family and his girlfriend said that they just had the feeling that he was still alive and that something, either he had an epileptic seizure or something else happened, and they feel like he's still out there. And they said, quote, bears and wolves wouldn't eat something like his gun or things like that, which is true. I mean, I've never heard of an animal eating a weapon. But unfortunately, after a little over a week of highly intensive search from all these different agencies, the official search was called off. And of course, this upset the family members and his girlfriend. So they continued the search on their own. And Jean-Pierre Bardou, who was the coordinator of these hunting expeditions that usually lasted about 8 days, he said that there had never been any other incident like this, and he couldn't understand it because there was just no other evidence, and he didn't understand the evidence that they had found. Why had the vest been taken off, and why was his camera left there? Where was the other evidence? It just didn't add up. It was almost like it was staged in a way. However, then thinking that way, why would they do that? So Jean-Pierre Bardou, he sent a bunch of his own other hunters and other people that had come up on their expeditions out searching for weeks and weeks after. He really went to, great lengths. He brought in specialized trained search dogs, and he said even the dogs, they almost got lost themselves. They couldn't pick up any scent. He brought in these specialized planes called de Havilland Beavers, and apparently they're one of the most statistically safe planes. They were coming out of Ungava Bay, which is just north of the site that he got lost or disappeared in. And still, with all the searching that they did, but via ground, via plane and helicopter, all his other hunters that came through, they found no other evidence of Mr. Rambone. Jean-Pierre Bardon is quoted in saying, "This is just a tragic reminder of its importance to always carry safety precautions, wear your orange vest, carry a compass, always have a lighter or something that you can create a fire with." And Mr. Rambone's family still is hopeful and believes that he is out there somewhere alive, possibly living with someone, not even remembering his past life because of something that happened, maybe a very serious epileptic seizure, or possibly he hit his head or something, but they're still hopeful. And I'm hopeful too. I mean, this is just one of those tragedies where you just want the family to have answers. This case in particular just really strikes at my heart, and it's just so confusing because Jim was such an experienced man. He was such an experienced hunter, and the evidence that we do have just doesn't add up. And it just seems as though something else is at play here. And I really hope that he is out there living somewhere with maybe somewhere in the native communities. Maybe he somehow found his way out. But it's just one of those cases where it does seem like he just vanished into thin air. Unlike disappearances of hikers that I cover on this channel, hunters usually do have an advantage because of several factors. A lot of times hikers, it's their first time out hiking in a national park or hiking in general. Hunters usually have years of experience. They're armed, obviously. They have binoculars, compasses. They are very familiar with navigation on foot. They usually have a very keen sense of direction, and it just obviously gives them advantage. And in this case, for someone that had 30 plus years experience, it just makes absolutely no sense. His beloved girlfriend at the time was just obviously devastated, and she did a ton of research and her own searches as well as trying to look after his farm. But she found out that in almost 100% of cases in this area, if a hunter did go missing, they would find the remains or the hunter would eventually turn up. And this is one case where it didn't happen, and she just can't make any sense of it, and neither can I. Incidents of missing hunters are fairly common throughout North America. Obviously, a lot of them happen in Alaska or in other parts of the country, but in most cases, if a hunter does get lost, based on the various research I did, it's because of either they're unequipped, they're unschooled, they don't have the necessary skills, they go out by themselves, or in some cases, they don't even know how to signal rescuers to alert them of their whereabouts. Now, another thing is that if you are out in any situation with a dog and the dog is unleashed, which you should always have your dog leashed, especially in bear and cougar country, because a lot of times I've researched, there's been cases where the dog has run off and the person has gone off running after the dog. The dog eventually comes back to a spot that it's known, but the person never does. Obviously, as most of you know, dogs have a much greater sense of smell, and they usually almost always find their way back. And another danger is, a lot of times in bear and cougar country, the dog will smell a bear, run into the woods after it, and then it will bring the bear right back into your campsite because the bear will start chasing the dog. Just a little bit of advice. You guys don't have to listen to me. I know everyone has their own free will. But in this case, Mr. Rambone, none of this applied. Yes, he did go off by himself, but he was very experienced, and it's just one of those enduring mysteries. And my thoughts and prayers go out to his entire family, his girlfriend, Miss Rizzo, all the authorities that went out looking for him, and to Jean-Pierre Baudon, who still has people looking and telling them of the story to hopefully get the family some answers. And next year it'll be 20 years since he disappeared. I truly hope they get answers one day soon. I want to thank you all for watching, as always, and please remember when commenting, this is somebody's family member, people that miss him and just want to know what happened. Special thank you to co.ag for providing the background music, and I will see everybody in the next one. Take care. Hey everyone, thanks for sticking with me to the end. This is the first video in a 3-part series that I'm going to be covering missing hunters that disappeared in very bizarre circumstances and that didn't get a lot of media coverage, and that I just want to present to you. And I'm also going to be working on some other cases that occurred in national parks. So I will see you guys then. Hope you're all having a great week.